When David told me he couldn't wait any longer at the urgent care clinic because of his important client meeting, I watched him drive away into the blizzard through the frosted windows, leaving me clutching my chest as another wave of pain shot through my ribs. He had no idea that within 2 hours, 3 military helicopters would be landing in that parking lot, and his face would turn whiter than the snow falling outside when he realized exactly who his wife of 12 years really was. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and until that December evening, when everything changed, I lived what most people would consider the perfect suburban life in Millbrook, Connecticut. At 38, I had everything a woman was supposed to want: a beautiful colonial house on Maple Street with white picket fencing, a successful husband who provided well for our family, and twin daughters, Emma and Sophie, who were the light of my life at 15 years old. David Mitchell was everything I thought I wanted in a husband when we met 13 years ago at a medical conference in Boston. He was a pharmaceutical sales representative with a charming smile and an ambitious drive that reminded me of my father. David came from a working-class family in Ohio, where his father had worked construction and his mother had been a school secretary. He was determined to build a better life for himself and spoke passionately about providing security and comfort for his future family. I was immediately drawn to his determination and his genuine affection for me. David would bring me coffee every morning during the conference, remember small details from our conversations, and make me feel like the most important person in the room when we talked. He had a way of making me laugh that I hadn't experienced before, and his dreams of suburban success aligned perfectly with what I thought I wanted for my future. What David didn't know about me, what nobody in Millbrook knew about me, was that Sarah Mitchell, the suburban housewife, was carefully constructed identity. My real name was Dr. Sarah Chen, and before I became a Connecticut soccer mom, I had been a trauma surgeon with the 82nd Airborne Division, serving 3 tours in Afghanistan and Iraq. I held the rank of lieutenant colonel in the Army Medical Corps and had spent 8 years of my life saving soldiers' lives in combat zones where most people couldn't imagine working. The decision to leave my military career and create a civilian identity had been complicated and deeply personal. During my final deployment in Afghanistan, I had been involved in a classified medical operation that saved the lives of several high-ranking military officials, but also put me on the radar of various international groups who might want to target me or my family. When I returned stateside, my commanding officer, General Patricia Hayes, had approached me with an unusual offer. "Sarah," she had said during our private meeting at Walter Reed Medical Center, "your skills and your service record make you invaluable to this country, but we also understand that you want a normal life, a family, a chance to be something other than a soldier. We have a program that allows exceptional medical personnel to maintain civilian lives while remaining available for critical national security situations." The program was called Deep Cover Medical Assets, and it allowed a select group of military medical personnel to live as civilians while maintaining their security clearances and their readiness to respond to national emergencies. In exchange for agreeing to be available when called upon, I would receive a substantial monthly stipend, complete identity protection, and the freedom to build whatever kind of life I wanted as long as I could respond within 6 hours if needed. The cover identity they created for me was perfect. Sarah Mitchell, a former nurse who had left her career to focus on family life, married to David Mitchell, pharmaceutical sales representative. My military records were sealed so deeply that even extensive background checks would only reveal my cover story. Only 3 people in Millbrook knew my real identity: my handler, Agent Rebecca Torres, who posed as a local real estate agent, and 2 other deep cover assets who lived in neighboring towns. Creating a life with David had been surprisingly easy, because my feelings for him were completely genuine. I had fallen in love with his ambition, his kindness, and his dream of building a stable family life. When I told him I was a former nurse who wanted to focus on raising children, he was supportive and encouraging. David loved the idea of being the provider, the man who could give his wife the luxury of staying home with their children. Our early years together had been wonderful. David's career in pharmaceutical sales had flourished, and he had worked his way up to regional manager for a major company, traveling throughout New England to build relationships with hospitals and medical practices. His income was substantial enough to afford our beautiful home, private schools for the girls, and the comfortable suburban lifestyle we both wanted. I had thrown myself into the role of suburban mother with the same dedication I had once applied to military medicine. I joined the PDA, volunteered at the girls' school, organized neighborhood events, and became exactly what everyone expected a pharmaceutical sales manager's wife to be. I was good at it, and I genuinely enjoyed the peaceful routine of domestic life after years of high-stress military service. The monthly stipend from the Deep Cover program meant that money was never a concern, though David believed our financial security came entirely from his pharmaceutical sales success. I let him believe this because it made him feel proud and accomplished, and because maintaining my cover required that nobody, including my husband, could know about my real background or my ongoing connection to the military. David and I had tried for years to have children, and when we finally succeeded with the twins through IVF, I thought our family was complete. Emma and Sophie were bright, athletic, and everything I had hoped for in daughters. They played soccer, excelled in school, and brought joy to every day of our lives. David was a devoted father who never missed their games or school events, and I loved watching him teach them to ride bikes and help them with homework. Our social life in Millbrook revolved around other families with children the same age. We attended barbecues and block parties, went to high school football games, and participated in all the rituals of suburban community life. I was particularly close with my neighbor, Jennifer Walsh, whose husband Tom worked in finance. Jennifer and I would drink coffee on our back porches while watching our children play, discussing everything from school politics to home renovation projects. David's work required him to travel frequently, sometimes for several days at a time, visiting hospitals and medical practices throughout his territory. I had grown accustomed to managing the household and the girls' schedules during his business trips, and I actually enjoyed the independence these periods gave me. David would call every evening when he was traveling, sharing stories about his meetings and asking about the girls' activities. What I didn't realize was that David's travel schedule had been changing over the past 2 years. He had been taking longer trips, going to cities that seemed outside his normal territory, and occasionally being vague about which hospitals he was visiting or which clients he was meeting. When I asked about these trips, David would explain that his company was expanding into new markets or that he was being considered for a promotion that would require him to cover a larger geographic area. I had attributed David's increased travel to career advancement and been proud of his growing success. His income had increased substantially over the past few years, allowing us to renovate our kitchen, take family vacations to Europe, and put money aside for the girls' college funds. David seemed confident and happy about his career trajectory, often talking about the major promotion he was expecting that would eventually allow him to work from home more often. The changes in David's behavior had been so gradual that I didn't recognize them as warning signs. He had become more secretive about his phone calls, often stepping outside or going to his home office when certain clients called. He had started working later hours, claiming that West Coast hospitals preferred evening meetings to accommodate their schedules. He had become less interested in our weekend family activities, often seeming distracted or preoccupied even when he was physically present. Most concerning was the change in how David talked about money. He had always been financially responsible, but recently he had become almost obsessive about our expenses. He questioned purchases that he had never noticed before, worried about the cost of the girls' activities, and suggested that we should be more conservative with our spending even though his income had been increasing. The night everything changed started like any other December evening in our household. Connecticut had been hit with an unexpected blizzard that had dumped nearly 2 feet of snow across our area, and the roads were treacherous despite the efforts of snow removal crews. David had returned from a 3-day business trip to Albany that afternoon, and we were having dinner together as a family for the first time in almost a week. Emma and Sophie were excited about the snow, planning to go sledding the next day if school was cancelled, which seemed likely given the severity of the storm. David seemed unusually quiet during dinner, picking at his food and checking his phone more frequently than usual. When I asked about his trip, he gave shorter answers than normal, saying only that the meetings had gone well and that he was tired from the drive home in bad weather. After dinner, while I was helping the girls with homework and David was in his office making what he said were follow-up calls from his trip, I began experiencing sharp pains in my chest and difficulty breathing. At first, I thought it might be heartburn from dinner, but the pain intensified rapidly and began radiating down my left arm. Having been a trauma surgeon, I recognized these symptoms immediately as potentially serious and knew I needed medical attention. "David," I called from the kitchen where I had been cleaning up after dinner, "I think I need to go to urgent care. I'm having chest pains and some trouble breathing." David emerged from his office with his phone still in his hand, looking annoyed at the interruption. "What kind of chest pains?" he asked, his tone suggesting that he thought I was overreacting to something minor. "Sharp pains that started about 20 minutes ago," I explained, now radiating down my arm. "My breathing feels restricted. I think we should go to urgent care to be safe." David looked out the window at the heavy snow that was still falling steadily. The urgent care center was about 15 minutes away in good weather, but the roads were going to be challenging. He glanced at his phone again, and I could see him calculating something in his mind. "Are you sure it's serious?" he asked. It's really coming down out there, and I have an important client call scheduled for 8:30. Maybe we should wait and see if it gets better on its own. I was surprised by his reluctance to take me for medical care, especially given the severity of the symptoms I was describing. David had always been attentive when any of us were sick, but tonight he seemed more concerned about his work call than about my health. David, I said firmly, I need to go now. These aren't symptoms we should wait and see about. He sighed heavily and looked at his phone one more time. Okay, let me tell the girls what's happening and we'll go. But I really hope this doesn't take too long. The drive to urgent care was tense and uncomfortable. David drove slowly because of the snow conditions, but I could sense his impatience with the situation. He kept checking the time on the dashboard and muttering about the weather and the inconvenient timing. When we hit a patch of slow traffic behind a snow plow, he actually groaned with frustration. How are you feeling? He asked, but his tone suggested he was hoping I would say I felt better and that we could turn around and go home. The same, I replied. Maybe a little worse. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I'm glad we're going. The urgent care center was busy despite the weather, filled with people who had slipped on ice, families with children suffering from winter illnesses, and other individuals dealing with weather-related medical issues. The waiting room was crowded and the staff seemed overwhelmed by the volume of patients combined with the challenges of operating during a blizzard. David and I checked in at the front desk and were told that the wait would be approximately 90 minutes due to the unusual number of patients and the fact that several staff members had been unable to get to work because of the snow. David immediately looked frustrated by this news and began calculating how long we would be there. 90 minutes? He said to the receptionist. Are you sure it won't be sooner than that? The receptionist, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, explained that they were doing their best but that the weather had created both staffing challenges and an unusually high patient volume. She suggested that if this wasn't a true emergency, we might want to consider waiting until morning and seeing our regular doctor. David turned to me with a hopeful expression. What do you think, Sarah? Maybe we should just go home and you can call Dr. Patterson in the morning if you're still having problems. I looked at my husband with growing concern. The man I had been married to for 12 years, the father of my children, was suggesting that I ignore chest pains and difficulty breathing because he didn't want to wait in an urgent care center. This wasn't the David I knew, the man who had stayed up all night with me when I had food poisoning, who had rushed Emma to the emergency room when she broke her arm, who had always put family health concerns above everything else. David, I said quietly, I'm not leaving. These symptoms could indicate something serious, and I need to be seen by a medical professional tonight. He looked at his watch again and then at his phone, where I could see he had several missed calls and text messages. Sarah, I really need to take this call with Peterson Industries. It's a huge potential contract, possibly the biggest one of my career. Can't you just wait here and I'll come back to pick you up when you're finished? The suggestion shocked me. David was proposing to leave me alone at urgent care during a blizzard while I was experiencing chest pains so that he could take a business call. This was so completely out of character for the man I had married that I wondered if he was having some kind of stress-related breakdown. You want to leave me here? I asked, making sure I had understood correctly. Just for the call, he said quickly. It's only scheduled to last about an hour, and then I'll come right back. You'll probably still be waiting to be seen anyway, so I won't miss anything important. I stared at my husband, trying to process what he was saying. David, I'm having chest pains and difficulty breathing. You want to leave me alone at urgent care during a blizzard to take a business call? He looked uncomfortable but didn't back down from his position. Sarah, you know how important this Peterson contract is. It could mean a promotion to vice president, maybe even a relocation to their headquarters in Boston. This is exactly the kind of opportunity I've been working toward for years. And you think that's more important than staying with your wife who might be having a heart attack? David's expression shifted slightly, and for a moment I saw something in his eyes that I didn't recognize. It wasn't concern or guilt or even embarrassment. It looked almost like calculation, as if he was weighing the costs and benefits of staying versus leaving. You're probably just having anxiety or heartburn, he said dismissively. You'll be fine. Here for an hour. There are doctors and nurses everywhere. I'll be back before you even get called in to be seen. The casual way he dismissed my symptoms and his complete lack of concern for leaving me alone during a medical crisis revealed something about David that I had never seen before. This wasn't the caring husband and father I thought I knew. This was someone who was prioritizing a business call over his wife's health and safety. Fine, I said quietly. Go take your call. David looked relieved that I wasn't going to argue further. He kissed my forehead quickly, a gesture that felt perfunctory rather than affectionate. "I'll be back as soon as the call is finished," he promised. "Call me if anything urgent happens." I watched through the urgent care center's windows as David walked through the heavy snow to our car, started the engine, and drove away into the blizzard. The man who had promised to love, honor, and cherish me in sickness and in health had just abandoned me at urgent care during a snowstorm because a business call was more important than my well-being. Sitting alone in that crowded waiting room, surrounded by other patients and their concerned family members, I began to see my marriage with new clarity. David's recent behavior, his increased travel, his secretiveness about phone calls, his obsession with money, and now his willingness to abandon me during a medical crisis all pointed to a man who had changed fundamentally from the person I had married. As I waited to be called for my examination, I found myself thinking about the skills and instincts that had kept me alive during 3 combat deployments. I had learned to read people quickly, to recognize when situations weren't what they appeared to be, to trust my intuition when something felt wrong. All of those instincts were telling me that David's behavior wasn't about career ambition or work stress. Something else was happening, something he was hiding from me. The chest pains that had brought me to urgent care were real and concerning. But as I sat in that waiting room watching David drive away, I realized that my marriage might be suffering from a more serious condition than my heart was. The man I had trusted with my cover identity, my children, and my life had just shown me that when it mattered most, he wasn't the person I thought he was. What David didn't know as he drove away into the snow was that abandoning me at urgent care during a blizzard was about to trigger a chain of events that would reveal exactly who Sarah Mitchell really was. Within hours, he would discover that his wife wasn't the former nurse and stay-at-home mother he believed her to be. He would learn that the woman he had left alone during a medical crisis was someone whose phone calls could summon military helicopters in the middle of a Connecticut snowstorm. But before that reckoning would come, I had to focus on my immediate health concerns and the growing realization that the man I had spent 12 years loving and trusting had been living a lie that was about to destroy our family in ways I was only beginning to understand. The urgent care physician, Dr. Amanda Rodriguez, was thorough and professional as she examined me in the small treatment room. She listened carefully to my description of the chest pains and breathing difficulties, checked my vital signs, and ordered an EKG to rule out any cardiac issues. The test results showed some irregularities that weren't immediately life-threatening but required follow-up with a cardiologist within the next few days. As Dr. Rodriguez explained the results and discharge instructions, I found myself thinking less about my medical condition and more about David's absence. It had been over 2 hours since he left for his supposed business call, and he hadn't returned or even sent a text message to check on my condition. The man who used to worry if I was 5 minutes late coming home from the grocery store had abandoned me during a medical crisis and apparently forgotten I existed. The blizzard had intensified while I was being examined, and through the treatment room window I could see that the parking lot was now covered with nearly 3 feet of snow. Most of the other patients in the urgent care center were being picked up by family members who had waited in the parking lot or had made the difficult drive through the storm to collect their loved ones. I was apparently the only person whose spouse had decided that a business call was more important than providing support during a medical emergency. Dr. Rodriguez noticed my concern about transportation and offered to call a taxi or rideshare service, but the roads were now considered impassable except for emergency vehicles. The few taxi companies still operating were prioritizing emergency calls only, and rideshare apps were showing no available drivers in our area. She suggested I call a family member or friend who might be able to help with transportation. I tried calling David's cell phone, but it went directly to voicemail without ringing. His business call had supposedly been scheduled to last only 1 hour, but it was now past 11 o'clock at night. Either the call had run much longer than expected, or David was deliberately ignoring my attempts to contact him. Neither possibility reflected well on his priorities or his commitment to our marriage. My next call was to Jennifer Walsh, my neighbor and closest friend in Millbrook. Jennifer answered on the second ring, and I could hear the concern in her voice as soon as she realized I was calling from urgent care. "Sarah, what happened? Are you okay?" she asked immediately. I explained about the chest pains and the medical evaluation, but I found myself reluctant to tell her that David had left me alone at urgent care to take a business call. The truth was too embarrassing and revealed too much about the problems in my marriage that I was only beginning to acknowledge. "Where's David?" Jennifer asked, clearly expecting that my husband would be handling transportation and support during a medical crisis. "He had to take an important business call," I said, trying to make it sound reasonable. "He's supposed to come back, but the weather has gotten really bad." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and I could sense Jennifer's confusion about why David would leave me alone during a medical emergency for any reason. Tom and Jennifer had been married for 16 years, and I knew that Tom would never prioritize work over Jennifer's health and safety. Sarah, Tom and I would come get you right now, but our street hasn't been plowed and our car is completely snowed in, Jennifer said apologetically. The whole neighborhood is basically shut down. Are you sure David is coming back tonight? The question forced me to confront the reality that I wasn't sure about anything regarding David's intentions or priorities anymore. His behavior over the past few months had been increasingly strange, but tonight had revealed something about his character that I found deeply disturbing. I think so, I replied, though I was no longer confident about that assumption. After ending the call with Jennifer, I sat in the urgent care waiting room trying to process what had happened and what it meant for my marriage and my family. The David I had fallen in love with 13 years ago would never have left me alone during a medical crisis. The devoted father who had never missed a school event or soccer game had apparently become someone who prioritized business calls over his wife's health and safety. As I waited for David to return or at least call with an explanation, I began thinking about his recent behavior with the analytical mindset that had served me well during my military career. When you're a combat surgeon, you learn to look for patterns, to recognize when symptoms don't add up to the obvious diagnosis, to trust your instincts when something feels wrong even if you can't immediately identify the problem. David's increased travel over the past 2 years had coincided with his growing secretiveness about phone calls and his obsession with our expenses. He had been receiving more text messages than usual, often at odd hours, and he had developed a habit of taking his phone with him everywhere, even to the bathroom. His explanations for his whereabouts during business trips had become vague and sometimes contradictory. Most concerning was the change in how David talked about our future. He used to make plans months or years in advance, discussing family vacations, home improvement projects, and the girls' college plans with enthusiasm and attention to detail. Recently, he had become evasive about long-term planning, suggesting that we should wait and see how things develop before making any major commitments. The pattern suggested someone who was either planning to leave or who was involved in activities that made long-term planning impossible. David's behavior tonight had eliminated any innocent explanations for his recent changes. A man who would abandon his wife at urgent care during a blizzard for a business call was capable of much worse deceptions. At nearly midnight, I finally received a text message from David. Call ran longer than expected. Road's too bad to drive safely. We'll pick you up first thing in the morning. The message confirmed what I had already begun to suspect. David had no intention of returning to urgent care that night. He was willing to leave me stranded during a blizzard rather than interrupt whatever he was actually doing. The reference to "roads too bad to drive safely" was particularly insulting, since he had managed to drive away from urgent care 3 hours earlier when the weather was already dangerous. I showed the message to Dr. Rodriguez, who was still on duty and had been checking on my situation periodically throughout the evening. She read it with obvious disapproval and immediately offered to let me stay in one of their overnight observation rooms rather than being stranded in the waiting area. Mrs. Mitchell, I have to say that in 15 years of emergency medicine, I've never had a patient whose spouse abandoned them during a snowstorm for a business call, Dr. Rodriguez said bluntly. This is not normal behavior for a caring partner. Her words confirmed what I already knew but had been reluctant to admit. David's actions were not just inconsiderate or poorly timed, they were fundamentally wrong and revealed something deeply troubling about his character and his commitment to our marriage. As I settled into the small observation room for what would apparently be a long night alone, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to find out exactly what David had been doing instead of supporting his wife during a medical crisis. More importantly, I was going to discover what else he had been hiding from me over the past 2 years. The first call I made was to Agent Rebecca Torres, my handler for the Deep Cover Medical Assets Program. Rebecca posed as a local real estate agent and checked in with me monthly to ensure that my cover identity remained secure and that I was prepared to respond if called upon for national security missions. She was one of only 3 people in Connecticut who knew my real identity and my military background. Rebecca answered her secure phone on the first ring, despite the late hour. "Sarah, what's your status?" she asked immediately, using the tone that indicated she was ready to coordinate emergency response if necessary. "I'm secure, but I need to activate personal surveillance protocols," I said, using the code phrase that indicated I needed investigative assistance for a personal matter that might affect my cover security. There was a brief pause while Rebecca processed my request. "Are you at risk of identity compromise?" she asked. "Unknown, but my domestic situation has become unstable in ways that could affect operational security," I replied, choosing my words carefully even on a secure line. Rebecca understood immediately that my marriage was experiencing problems that could potentially expose my real identity or compromise my ability to respond to military assignments. The Deep Cover program took domestic stability very seriously, because family problems often led to security breaches or operational complications. "I can have a surveillance team in position within 6 hours," Rebecca said. "What level of investigation do you need?" "Full financial and communications analysis," I replied. "I need to know everything about my domestic partner's activities for the past 24 months. The resources available through the Deep Cover program were extensive and sophisticated. Within hours, Rebecca would have access to David's financial records, phone communications, travel patterns, and any other information necessary to determine whether his behavior posed a security risk to my cover identity or my operational readiness." "Understood," Rebecca confirmed. "I'll initiate comprehensive background analysis and have preliminary results by tomorrow evening." "Are you in immediate physical danger?" I considered the question carefully. David's abandonment of me during a medical emergency was cruel and revealing, but I didn't believe he posed a direct physical threat. However, his recent behavioral changes suggested he might be involved in activities that could indirectly threaten my safety or the security of my cover identity. "No immediate physical danger," I replied, "but operational security may be compromised, depending on what the investigation reveals." After ending the call with Rebecca, I realized that I had just activated resources that would investigate my husband with the same thoroughness used for national security threats. The Deep Cover program had access to databases and surveillance capabilities that could uncover any secret David might be hiding. By tomorrow evening, I would know everything about his recent activities, his financial situation, and his communications. The decision to investigate David using military resources felt like crossing a line that I couldn't uncross. Once I learned the truth about his behavior, I would have to decide what to do with that information and how it would affect our marriage and our family. But David's actions tonight had made it clear that our relationship was already damaged beyond repair. A man who would abandon his wife during a medical crisis had already destroyed the foundation of trust that made marriage possible. As I tried to sleep in the urgent care observation room, listening to the wind and snow outside, I found myself thinking about the skills and instincts that had kept me alive during combat deployments. I had learned to recognize threats quickly, to trust my intuition even when the evidence wasn't yet complete, and to take decisive action when situations became dangerous. All of those instincts were telling me that David's behavior represented a threat not just to our marriage but potentially to my safety and the security of my real identity. The man who had left me stranded during a blizzard was capable of deceptions that could be far more serious than a business call. The next morning brought clear skies and the beginning of snow removal efforts throughout Connecticut. David arrived at urgent care at 8 o'clock, looking refreshed and well-rested, carrying coffee and wearing the expression of someone who expected gratitude for showing up to collect his stranded wife. "Sarah, I'm so sorry about last night," he said as I gathered my belongings from the observation room. The Peterson call ran until almost 2 in the morning, and then the roads were completely impassable. I stayed at the office rather than risk trying to drive in those conditions. His explanation was smooth and well-rehearsed, delivered with the right combination of apology and justification. David had clearly spent time crafting a story that would minimize his responsibility while making his abandonment of me seem like a reasonable response to difficult circumstances. "You stayed at your office all night?" I asked, testing his story for consistency. "Yes, I have a couch in there and emergency supplies for exactly these kinds of situations," David replied confidently. "I tried calling the urgent care center several times to check on you, but their phones were down because of the storm." I knew he was lying because I had been at urgent care all night and their phones had been working fine. David hadn't called once to check on my condition or to explain his absence. His willingness to lie so easily about something I could verify made me wonder what else he had been dishonest about. "How are you feeling?" he asked as we walked through the parking lot toward our car. "Did the doctors find anything serious?" "Some irregular heart rhythms that need follow-up with a cardiologist," I replied, watching his reaction carefully. "Nothing immediately life-threatening, but it could have been serious if left untreated." David nodded sympathetically, but I noticed that he didn't ask about the follow-up appointment or offer to help coordinate my care with a specialist. His concern seemed performative rather than genuine, as if he was going through the motions of being a caring husband without actually feeling any real worry about my health. The drive home was quiet and tense. David made small talk about the storm damage and the snow removal efforts, but he didn't apologize again for leaving me stranded or acknowledge that his behavior had been inappropriate. He seemed to believe that his rehearsed explanation had resolved the situation and that we could return to normal domestic routine. When we arrived home, Emma and Sophie were already awake and getting ready for school, which had been delayed, but not cancelled. They ran to hug me as soon as I walked through the door, having been worried about my health and confused about why their father had returned home alone the night before. "Mom, are you okay?" Emma asked, studying my face for signs of illness or distress. "Dad said you had to stay at urgent care because of the storm, but we were worried something serious had happened." I looked at David with surprise. He had told the girls that I stayed at urgent care because of weather conditions, not because he had abandoned me there. His version of events eliminated any suggestion that he had chosen not to wait with me or support me during a medical crisis. "I'm fine, sweetheart," I told Emma, hugging both girls tightly. "The doctors checked everything and I just need to follow up with a specialist to be safe." "What kind of specialist?" Sophie asked with the concern that teenagers show when they realize their parents are mortal and vulnerable. "A heart doctor, just to make sure everything is working properly," I explained, glancing at David to see if he would offer to help coordinate the appointment or show any interest in my ongoing medical care. David was checking his phone and seemed distracted by incoming messages. He looked up when he realized we were all looking at him. "Sorry, Peterson Industries is following up on last night's call. This contract is really important for our family's future." His priorities were clear even now, the morning after abandoning me during a medical emergency. David was more interested in his phone messages than in discussing my health concerns or supporting me through the stress of needing cardiac follow-up care. After the girls left for school, David announced that he needed to go into the office to complete paperwork related to his Peterson Industries contract. He kissed my forehead in the same perfunctory way he had the night before and promised to be home for dinner. "Take care of yourself today," he said as he gathered his briefcase and car keys. "Maybe you should rest and avoid any strenuous activities until you see the cardiologist." The suggestion that I should rest while he returned to his normal work routine highlighted the fundamental selfishness of his approach to our marriage. David expected me to manage my own medical crisis while he focused on business opportunities that he claimed were important for our family's future but that seemed to benefit only his career ambitions. After David left for work, I spent the morning making appointments with cardiologists and thinking about the investigation that Rebecca Torres had initiated the night before. By evening, I would have access to comprehensive information about David's activities, finances, and communications over the past 2 years. The truth about his recent behavior would finally be revealed. The house felt different that morning, as if David's abandonment of me the night before had changed the fundamental atmosphere of our home. The comfortable domestic routine that I had enjoyed for 12 years now felt hollow and temporary. I found myself looking at family photographs and wondering how much of our life together had been built on lies and deceptions. At noon, Rebecca Torres called to arrange a meeting for that evening when she would present the results of her investigation into David's activities. Her tone was professional but carried an undertone of concern that suggested the preliminary findings were troubling. "Sarah, we need to meet tonight to discuss what we've discovered," Rebecca said carefully. "Some of the information raises significant concerns about operational security and your personal safety." The phrasing indicated that David's deceptions were more serious than simple marital infidelity or business problems. Rebecca's concern about operational security meant that David's activities could potentially expose my real identity or compromise my ability to serve as a deep-cover medical asset. "Where do you want to meet?" I asked, already knowing that this conversation would change everything about my understanding of my marriage and my future. "My office at 7 tonight," Rebecca replied. "Come alone and use counter-surveillance protocols. We may need to consider emergency relocation depending on what the full investigation reveals." The mention of possible relocation sent a chill through me. Emergency relocation was only considered when a deep-cover asset's identity was at risk of exposure or when their domestic situation posed a direct threat to national security operations. Whatever David had been doing, it was serious enough to potentially require me to abandon my life in Millbrook and relocate with a new identity. As I spent the afternoon waiting for my meeting with Rebecca, I found myself mentally preparing for the possibility that everything I thought I knew about David and our marriage was about to be revealed as a carefully constructed lie. The man who had abandoned me during a medical crisis might be involved in activities that threatened not just our family but national security interests. The David Mitchell I had married 13 years ago might never have existed at all. The pharmaceutical sales representative with dreams of suburban success might have been as much of a cover identity as my own Sarah Mitchell persona. The difference was that my cover identity had been created to protect national security interests, while David's deceptions appeared to be motivated by much darker purposes. That evening, as I prepared to learn the truth about my husband's secret life, I realized that the chest pains that had brought me to urgent care might have been my body's way of warning me about threats that went far beyond cardiac irregularities. The real danger to my health and safety might be sleeping in my bed every night and sharing breakfast with my children every morning. Within hours, I would discover just how right those instincts had been. Rebecca Torres' real estate office was located in a nondescript strip mall on the outskirts of Millbrook, positioned perfectly for conducting sensitive meetings without attracting attention from neighbors or local residents. I arrived at exactly 7 o'clock, having used the counter-surveillance techniques I had learned during my military training to ensure I wasn't being followed. The parking lot was nearly empty except for Rebecca's black SUV and a few other vehicles that belonged to legitimate evening customers of the neighboring businesses. Rebecca's office appeared to be a typical small-town real estate agency, complete with property listings in the windows and comfortable seating areas for client consultations. However, the back office where she conducted deep-cover business was equipped with sophisticated communication equipment, secure computers, and surveillance monitors that would have impressed any intelligence agency. The contrast between her public persona and her actual capabilities was striking, though no more dramatic than my own dual identity. "Sarah, please sit down," Rebecca said as she led me into the secure conference room. Her expression was grim, and she carried a thick folder that suggested the investigation into David's activities had uncovered substantial information. "I need to warn you that what we've discovered is more serious than typical marital problems. This affects your operational security and potentially your physical safety." The formal tone and the mention of physical safety confirmed my worst fears about David's recent behavior. Rebecca had access to investigative resources that could uncover any secret, and if she was concerned about my safety, then David's deceptions went far beyond business trips and phone calls. "How serious?" I asked, preparing myself for revelations that would fundamentally change my understanding of my marriage and my life in Millbrook. Rebecca opened the folder and spread documents across the conference table like a prosecutor presenting evidence in a criminal trial. "David Mitchell is not who you think he is," she began. "His identity as a pharmaceutical sales representative is partially fabricated, and his recent activities pose a direct threat to your cover and potentially to national security." The words hit me like a physical blow. For 12 years, I had been living with a man who was apparently as much of a fraud as I was, except that his deceptions served personal rather than patriotic purposes. The life we had built together, the family we had created, the future we had planned was all based on lies that were now being systematically exposed. Rebecca pulled out a series of photographs showing David in locations and situations that had nothing to do with pharmaceutical sales. "Here's your husband meeting with Viktor Petrov, a known arms dealer with connections to Russian intelligence services," she said, pointing to a surveillance photo taken at what appeared to be an upscale restaurant in Boston. This meeting took place 3 weeks ago during his supposed business trip to Albany. The image showed David sitting across from a heavy-set man with distinctly Slavic features, both of them leaning forward in intense conversation. David's body language suggested familiarity and comfort with this individual, not the nervous tension of someone being coerced or blackmailed into a meeting. "David has been selling information about your identity and your military background to foreign intelligence services," Rebecca continued, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was revealing. "We've intercepted communications indicating that he's been providing details about deep-cover medical assets, including their real names, military records, and current locations." The betrayal was so complete and devastating that I struggled to process the full implications. My husband, the father of my children, the man I had trusted with my life and my secrets, had been systematically selling information that could get me killed. Worse, he had been endangering other deep-cover assets whose only crime was serving their country while trying to maintain normal family lives. "How long has this been going on?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Our investigation suggests approximately 18 months, Rebecca replied. "The timeline coincides with his increased travel and the behavioral changes you've noticed. David has been using his pharmaceutical sales job as cover for meetings with intelligence contacts throughout the Northeast." She showed me financial records that revealed the true source of David's increased income over the past 2 years. Instead of pharmaceutical sales bonuses, he had been receiving payments from shell companies connected to foreign intelligence services. The money I had attributed to his professional success had actually been payment for betraying his wife and endangering national security. The amounts were staggering. David had received over $400,000 in payments over the past 18 months, money that had funded our kitchen renovation, our family vacations, and the girls' private school tuition. Every luxury we had enjoyed recently had been purchased with blood money earned by selling information about American intelligence assets. Rebecca pulled out another set of documents showing David's communications with his handlers. He's been providing them with detailed information about your daily routines, your medical training, your psychological profile, and your vulnerabilities, she explained. They know about your combat experience, your surgical skills, and your current location. They also know about Emma and Sophie. The mention of my daughters sent a wave of cold rage through me that was unlike anything I had experienced even during combat. David hadn't just betrayed me. He had put our children at risk by providing foreign intelligence services with information that could be used to target our family. The man who kissed them goodnight every evening had been systematically selling information that could be used to harm them. What kind of information about the girls? I asked, dreading the answer. School schedules, extracurricular activities, friends' names, teachers' information, Rebecca said grimly. Everything necessary to plan a kidnapping or use them as leverage against you. David has essentially created a targeting package for anyone who wants to pressure you into cooperation. The scope of the betrayal was breathtaking in its cruelty and completeness. David hadn't just sold information about me, he had provided enemies of the United States with everything they needed to destroy my family and compromise my ability to serve my country. The man I had loved and trusted had systematically catalogued our vulnerabilities and sold them to the highest bidder. There's more, Rebecca continued, pulling out another set of photographs. David has been having an affair with a woman named Natasha Volkov, who works for the same intelligence network that's been purchasing information about deep cover assets. She's not just his romantic interest, she's his handler. The surveillance photos showed David with a stunningly beautiful woman in her early 30s, clearly of Eastern European descent. The images captured them in intimate situations that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship, but more importantly, they showed David receiving envelopes and electronic devices that were obviously intelligence materials. Natasha Volkov is a trained intelligence operative specializing in recruiting and handling assets who have access to classified information, Rebecca explained. She's been running David for the entire 18 months he's been selling information. The relationship is professional first, personal second. Looking at the photos of David with his handler, I realized that every aspect of his betrayal had been carefully planned and orchestrated. This wasn't a case of gradual corruption or opportunistic greed. David had been systematically recruited, trained, and deployed against his own family by professionals who understood exactly how to exploit his weaknesses and ambitions. The Peterson Industries contract he mentioned last night doesn't exist, Rebecca continued. He was actually meeting with Natasha to deliver updated information about your current medical condition and your response to cardiac stress. They're particularly interested in any health issues that might affect your operational readiness. The revelation that David's abandonment of me at urgent care had been connected to his intelligence activities added another layer of cruelty to his betrayal. He hadn't left me during a medical crisis for a business opportunity, he had left me to report on my health status to foreign agents who were planning ways to exploit any weakness or vulnerability. How did they recruit him? I asked, trying to understand how the man I had married could have been turned against his own family. Rebecca showed me a psychological profile that had been compiled as part of the investigation. David Mitchell has a personality type that makes him vulnerable to recruitment by foreign intelligence services, she explained. He's motivated by status, money, and recognition, but he also harbors resentment about his working-class background and his dependence on your family connections for social advancement. The profile described David as someone who felt emasculated by being married to a woman with a more impressive military background and family wealth, even though he didn't know the full extent of my service record. He resented living in a house that was purchased primarily with money from my deep cover stipend, driving cars that were funded by my military benefits, and attending social events where his status came from being my husband rather than his own achievements. Natasha Volkov identified these psychological vulnerabilities and crafted a recruitment approach that promised David financial independence, professional respect, and the excitement of being involved in intelligence work, Rebecca continued. She convinced him that selling information about deep cover assets was actually patriotic because it helped foreign governments understand American intelligence capabilities and reduce international tensions. The manipulation was sophisticated and targeted specifically at David's psychological weaknesses. Natasha had offered him everything he felt he was missing in our marriage: financial independence from my income, professional recognition for his own activities, and the excitement of being involved in work that seemed more important than pharmaceutical sales. Most dangerously, she convinced him that you didn't really love him and that your marriage was a cover for your intelligence activities, Rebecca added. David believes that your relationship with him is purely professional and that you've been using him for operational security without any genuine emotional attachment. The psychological manipulation had been masterful in its cruelty. Natasha had convinced David that I was the one living a lie, that our marriage was fake, and that betraying me was actually an act of liberation rather than treason. She had turned his insecurities about our relationship into justification for destroying our family and endangering our children. David plans to disappear with Natasha and the money he's earned from selling intelligence information, Rebecca said, showing me travel documents and financial records. They're planning to leave the country within the next 2 weeks, before his activities can be fully discovered and prosecuted. The timeline explained David's recent obsession with our expenses and his reluctance to make long-term plans. He had been preparing to abandon our family while ensuring that he could access as much money as possible before his escape. The man who had promised to love and protect Emma and Sophie was planning to disappear from their lives without explanation or concern for their emotional well-being. What about the girls? I asked. The question that mattered most to me is both a mother and a national security asset. David's plan doesn't include them, Rebecca replied grimly. He's apparently convinced himself that they'll be better off without him and that you can provide for them adequately using your deep cover benefits. He's essentially planning to abandon his children to pursue a new life with his intelligence handler. The casual cruelty of David's plan was stunning in its selfishness. He was willing to traumatize Emma and Sophie by disappearing from their lives without explanation, leaving them to wonder what they had done wrong and whether their father had ever really loved them. The man who had taught them to ride bikes and helped them with homework was planning to walk away from their lives as if they had never existed. We have enough evidence to arrest David immediately and charge him with espionage, treason, and conspiracy against the United States, Rebecca said. However, we have an opportunity to use his planned escape to capture Natasha Volkov and potentially roll up the entire intelligence network that's been targeting deep cover assets. The proposal was both professionally appealing and personally satisfying. Instead of simply arresting David and allowing his handlers to disappear, we could use his betrayal as an opportunity to protect other deep cover assets and strike a significant blow against foreign intelligence operations targeting American military personnel. What do you need from me? I asked, already knowing that I would cooperate with any plan that would ensure David and his accomplices faced appropriate consequences for their actions. We want you to appear to discover his affair and his intelligence activities gradually, over the next week, Rebecca explained. You'll confront him about the affair first, which will force him to accelerate his escape timeline. We'll be monitoring all his communications with Natasha, and when they meet to finalize their departure, we'll arrest both of them along with their intelligence contacts. The plan would require me to continue living with David while knowing that he was a traitor who had betrayed our family and endangered our children. I would have to pretend to be shocked by discoveries I had already made, act devastated by betrayals I was already planning to counter, and maintain the facade of our marriage while preparing to destroy the man I had once loved. There's one more element to consider, Rebecca added. We want to stage David's final arrest in a way that demonstrates the consequences of betraying deep cover assets. We're planning to have him arrested by a joint military and FBI task force, with full media coverage, to send a message to other potential traitors about what happens to people who sell information about American intelligence personnel. The public nature of David's arrest would destroy any remaining pretense about our normal suburban life. Emma and Sophie would learn that their father was a traitor and that their mother was a military intelligence officer. Our neighbors would discover that the Mitchell family had been living elaborate cover identities. The life I had built in Millbrook would be completely destroyed. However, the alternative was to allow David to escape with Natasha and continue selling information that could get other deep cover assets killed. The choice between protecting my family's privacy and protecting other military families was no choice at all. My duty to my fellow service members outweighed any personal considerations about maintaining my cover identity. I'll do whatever is necessary to stop David and protect other assets, I told Rebecca. What's the timeline? We need you to initiate the confrontation tomorrow evening, Rebecca replied. Based on our monitoring of his communications, David is planning to meet with Natasha this weekend to finalize their departure. If you confront him about the affair tomorrow night, he'll contact her immediately to move up their timeline, which will give us the opportunity to arrest them together. The plan would compress weeks of careful preparation into a few days of intense psychological warfare. I would have to confront David about his betrayal while secretly coordinating with Rebecca to ensure that his arrest would happen at the moment of maximum impact. The timing would need to be perfect to avoid giving him or Natasha any opportunity to escape or warn their intelligence contacts. There's something else you should know, Rebecca said, her expression becoming even more serious. The cardiac symptoms you experienced yesterday weren't random. Our medical analysis suggests that you may have been experiencing the effects of a slow-acting poison that David has been administering over the past several weeks. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. David hadn't just been betraying me, he had been slowly poisoning me. The chest pains and breathing difficulties that had brought me to urgent care had been caused by my husband's deliberate attempt to harm my health. His abandonment of me during the medical crisis had been part of a larger plan to incapacitate or eliminate me. The medical team at Walter Reed has developed a treatment protocol that will counteract the effects of the poison and restore your normal cardiac function, Rebecca continued. You'll need to begin treatment immediately, which means we'll need to arrange for you to receive medical care without David's knowledge. The logistical challenges of receiving military medical treatment while maintaining my cover identity and preparing to confront David seemed overwhelming. However, the knowledge that my husband had been poisoning me while pretending to love me provided additional motivation to ensure that his arrest would be as devastating and public as possible. How will we arrange for my medical treatment? I asked, already anticipating that the solution would involve revealing my real identity to more people in Millbrook. We're going to stage a medical emergency that will require immediate helicopter evacuation to a military medical facility, Rebecca explained. The cardiac symptoms you've been experiencing provide perfect cover for an emergency airlift that will be justified by your apparent medical condition. The plan was both medically necessary and tactically brilliant. A dramatic helicopter evacuation would establish my real identity as someone important enough to warrant military medical intervention, while providing cover for the treatment I needed to counteract David's poisoning. It would also serve as a warning to David that his wife was not the helpless suburban housewife he believed her to be. When will this happen? I asked, understanding that the medical emergency would need to be carefully timed to coordinate with David's confrontation and arrest. Tomorrow afternoon, while David is at work, Rebecca replied. We'll stage the emergency at your home so that your neighbors and the local medical services will witness the helicopter landing. By the time David returns home, the entire neighborhood will know that Sarah Mitchell is someone who commands military medical resources. The psychological impact on David would be devastating. He would return home to discover that his wife, whom he had been betraying and poisoning, was important enough to warrant emergency military intervention. The revelation of my real status would destroy his assumptions about our relationship and force him to realize that he had been manipulating someone far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. What about Emma and Sophie? I asked, concerned about how my daughters would react to discovering that their mother required emergency military medical treatment. They'll be told that you experienced a cardiac episode that required specialized treatment only available at military medical facilities, Rebecca explained. They don't need to know about the poisoning or David's involvement until after his arrest. For now, they'll simply understand that their mother has access to the best possible medical care through her military connections. The cover story would allow my daughters to process my medical crisis without the additional trauma of learning that their father had been poisoning me. They would have time to adjust to the revelation of my military background before learning the full extent of David's betrayal and the danger he had posed to our family. Are you prepared for what happens after David's arrest? Rebecca asked. Your cover identity will be completely compromised, and you'll need to decide whether to relocate with a new identity or remain in Millbrook with your real background exposed. The question forced me to confront the reality that everything about my life was about to change permanently. The comfortable suburban existence I had enjoyed for 12 years was ending, and I would need to rebuild my identity and my relationship with my daughters based on truth rather than carefully constructed lies. I want to stay in Millbrook and live as Dr. Sarah Chen, I said, surprising myself with the certainty of my decision. Emma and Sophie deserve to know who their mother really is, and I want to continue serving my country from a position of strength rather than hiding behind a cover identity. The decision felt liberating in a way I hadn't expected. For 12 years, I had been living as someone else, suppressing my real accomplishments and pretending to be less capable than I actually was. The revelation of my military background would allow me to live authentically for the first time since my daughters were born. Rebecca nodded approvingly. That's probably the healthiest choice for both you and the girls, she said. Living with a false identity for extended periods can be psychologically damaging, especially when it requires you to minimize your real achievements and capabilities. The remaining details of our plan were complex but straightforward. I would return home and behave normally until the staged medical emergency the following afternoon. After receiving treatment for David's poisoning, I would confront him about his affair and intelligence activities, forcing him to contact Natasha and accelerate their escape plans. The final arrest would take place when David and Natasha met to finalize their departure, with full media coverage to demonstrate the consequences of betraying American intelligence assets. "Sarah, before you leave," Rebecca said as we concluded our meeting, "I want you to understand that what David has done to you and your family is one of the most serious breaches of trust and security we've encountered in the Deep Cover program. His actions have endangered not just you but dozens of other assets and their families. What you're doing by helping us capture him and his handlers will protect countless American military families." The reminder of what was at stake beyond my personal situation provided additional motivation for the difficult days ahead. David's betrayal had consequences that extended far beyond our marriage and our family. Other Deep Cover assets were living in danger because of information he had sold, and other military families were at risk because of his greed and selfishness. As I drove home from Rebecca's office, I realized that I was no longer the woman who had been abandoned at urgent care 2 nights earlier. The frightened and confused wife who had waited alone during a medical crisis had been replaced by a determined military officer who was preparing to strike back against an enemy who had infiltrated her home and threatened her family. David Mitchell was about to discover that he had made the fatal mistake of underestimating the woman he had been betraying. The suburban housewife he thought he could poison and abandon was actually a combat-trained surgeon with access to military resources that could destroy his life and his freedom. Tomorrow, his comfortable deceptions would begin to unravel, and by the end of the week, he would understand exactly who he had been sleeping next to for 12 years. The revelation would be far more devastating than anything he had experienced in his comfortable life of lies and betrayal. For the first time since discovering David's true nature, I felt genuinely excited about the future. My daughters would finally know who their mother really was, my fellow service members would be protected from further betrayal, and David would face consequences that matched the magnitude of his crimes against his family and his country. The next morning arrived with deceptive normalcy. David woke up at his usual time, showered, and came downstairs for breakfast wearing his typical pharmaceutical sales uniform of pressed khakis and a button-down shirt. He kissed my forehead with the same perfunctory affection he had shown for months, completely unaware that I knew he had been poisoning me while planning to abandon our family for a life with his Russian handler. Emma and Sophie were already at the breakfast table, discussing their plans for the upcoming weekend and complaining about their history teacher's latest assignment. They interacted with David exactly as they always had, seeking his approval for their weekend activities and asking him to help settle a dispute about which movie they should watch that evening. The normalcy of their behavior highlighted the devastating impact David's arrest would have on their lives when they learned that their father was a traitor. David announced that he would be working late again, claiming that Peterson Industries had requested additional documentation for their supposed contract. His lie was delivered with the same casual confidence he had shown for months, and if I hadn't known the truth about his activities, I would have accepted his explanation without question. The ease with which he deceived our daughters while planning to disappear from their lives demonstrated a level of callousness that still shocked me despite everything I had learned. After David left for work and the girls departed for school, I spent the morning making final preparations for the staged medical emergency that would begin the process of destroying David's carefully constructed deceptions. Rebecca had provided me with a small device that would trigger cardiac symptoms similar to those I had experienced 2 nights earlier, but more severe and dramatic. The symptoms would be genuine enough to justify emergency military medical intervention while ensuring that I remained conscious and in control throughout the crisis. At exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I activated the device and immediately felt my heart rate accelerate and my chest tighten with sharp pains that were frighteningly realistic. I called 911 from our landline, ensuring that the emergency dispatch would create an official record of my medical crisis that David could verify when he returned home. "This is Sarah Mitchell at 847 Maple Street," I said to the emergency dispatcher, my voice appropriately strained and breathless. "I'm experiencing severe chest pains and difficulty breathing. I think I'm having a heart attack." The dispatcher immediately began coordinating emergency response while keeping me on the line to monitor my condition. Within minutes, I could hear sirens approaching our neighborhood, and soon our quiet suburban street was filled with ambulances, fire trucks, and police cars responding to what appeared to be a life-threatening medical emergency. Jennifer Walsh appeared at my front door almost immediately, having heard the sirens and seen the emergency vehicles converging on our house. "Sarah, what's happening?" she asked with obvious concern. "Are you okay?" "I'm having severe chest pains," I explained, maintaining the performance that would establish the medical justification for what was about to happen. "The paramedics are here now." The EMT team that entered our house was professional and thorough, but I could tell from their equipment and their communications that they were military medical personnel rather than local emergency responders. They performed the necessary examinations to document my cardiac symptoms while discreetly confirming my identity and preparing for the helicopter evacuation that would reveal my true status to the entire neighborhood. "Mrs. Mitchell, your condition requires immediate transport to a specialized cardiac facility," the lead paramedic announced loudly enough for Jennifer and the other neighbors who had gathered outside to hear clearly. "We're arranging for military medical evacuation due to the severity of your symptoms and your medical history." The mention of military medical evacuation caused Jennifer's eyes to widen with surprise and confusion. "Sarah, you never mentioned any military medical history," she said, clearly trying to understand why her suburban neighbor would have access to military medical resources. Before I could respond, the distinctive sound of approaching helicopters filled the air above our neighborhood. Through the living room windows, I could see 3 military helicopters descending toward the large field behind our house, their rotors creating a windstorm that bent trees and scattered debris across our normally peaceful suburban street. The helicopters were impressive and intimidating, clearly designed for military operations rather than civilian medical transport. 2 were armed escort helicopters providing security for the medical evacuation, while the third was a sophisticated medical transport helicopter equipped with advanced life support equipment. The display of military resources was far beyond anything a typical suburban housewife would command, and the message to David would be unmistakable when he returned home. Jennifer and the other neighbors stood in stunned silence as military medical personnel emerged from the helicopters and coordinated with the EMT team for my transfer. The lead flight medic, a woman with the bearing and confidence of a career military officer, approached our house and addressed me by rank rather than my civilian name. "Colonel Chen, we're ready for immediate evacuation to Walter Reed Medical Center," she announced clearly. "Your medical team is standing by for emergency cardiac intervention." The use of my military rank in front of my neighbors eliminated any remaining pretense about my civilian identity. Jennifer's face showed complete shock as she realized that her coffee-drinking, PDA volunteering neighbor was actually a high-ranking military officer whose medical crisis required emergency intervention by multiple military helicopters. "Sarah, you're a colonel?" Jennifer asked, her voice barely audible over the helicopter rotors. "What's your real name?" "Dr. Sarah Chen, Lieutenant Colonel, United States Army Medical Corps," I replied, allowing my neighbors to hear my real identity for the first time in 12 years. "I'm sorry I couldn't tell you the truth before, but my service required maintaining a civilian cover identity." The evacuation process was swift and professional, designed to create maximum visual impact while ensuring my safety during transport. Military personnel secured our house and coordinated with local police to manage the crowd of neighbors and curious onlookers who had gathered to witness the unprecedented military operation taking place in our quiet suburban neighborhood. As the medical helicopter lifted off from the field behind our house, I could see the entire neighborhood spread out below me, with dozens of people standing in their yards watching the military evacuation of someone they had believed was an ordinary suburban housewife. The sight was both liberating and terrifying, marking the end of my life as Sarah Mitchell and the beginning of whatever came next as Dr. Sarah Chen. The flight to Walter Reed Medical Center took 30 minutes, during which the medical team monitored my condition and began administering treatments to counteract the effects of David's poisoning. The antidote was administered through an IV that also contained medication to normalize my cardiac function and eliminate the artificial symptoms that had justified the emergency evacuation. Dr. Patricia Morrison, the cardiologist who had been coordinating my treatment, greeted me personally when we arrived at Walter Reed. "Colonel Chen, your cardiac function is returning to normal parameters, but we'll need to monitor you for several hours to ensure complete elimination of the toxin from your system," she explained as we moved through the military medical facility. The treatment was thorough and sophisticated, involving blood work, cardiac monitoring, and medication protocols that could only have been developed by military medical researchers. The fact that such extensive preparation had been necessary to counteract David's poisoning highlighted the seriousness of his attempt to harm me and the professional level of his intelligence activities. While I received medical treatment, Rebecca Torres coordinated the next phase of our operation from a secure communication center within the hospital. David had already been contacted by his office and informed about my medical emergency and military evacuation. His reaction, monitored through surveillance equipment, had been exactly what we had expected: shock, confusion, and immediate contact with Natasha Volkov to discuss the implications of my revealed military status. David's communications with Natasha were intercepted and recorded, providing additional evidence of their intelligence activities and their plans to escape together. His handler was clearly concerned that my military background might compromise their operation, and she instructed David to accelerate their departure timeline and meet her that evening to finalize their escape plans. "Colonel Chen," Rebecca said, as she briefed me on David's reaction, "your husband is in full panic mode. He's realized that he's been married to a military officer for 12 years without knowing it, and he's terrified about what else you might have hidden from him. Natasha has ordered him to meet her tonight at a warehouse in Hartford where they'll finalize their departure and transfer the remaining intelligence materials. The location Natasha had chosen for their meeting was perfect for our purposes, isolated enough to avoid civilian casualties but accessible enough for our arrest teams to position themselves effectively. The warehouse was used by one of the shell companies connected to their intelligence network, and surveillance equipment had already been installed to record their final meeting and capture evidence of their espionage activities. "What's the arrest plan?" I asked, eager to ensure that David and Natasha would face appropriate consequences for their betrayal and their crimes against American military families. "Joint FBI and military intelligence teams will surround the warehouse before David arrives," Rebecca explained. "We'll allow the meeting to proceed long enough to capture them discussing their intelligence activities and their plans to escape with stolen classified information. The arrest will be coordinated to take both of them simultaneously, preventing either one from destroying evidence or warning their contacts. The timing would be critical to ensure that David and Natasha were caught in the act of coordinating their espionage activities and their planned departure. The evidence captured during their final meeting would be sufficient to convict them of treason, espionage, and conspiracy against the United States, ensuring lengthy prison sentences that would serve as a deterrent to other potential traitors." "What about Emma and Sophie?" I asked, my primary concern being my daughter's emotional well-being during the crisis that was about to destroy their understanding of their family and their father. "They've been taken to a secure location by family services personnel who specialize in supporting children of military families during national security crises," Rebecca assured me. "They're being cared for by professionals who understand how to help children process the trauma of learning that a parent is involved in espionage activities. The arrangement would ensure that my daughters received appropriate support during the most difficult period of their lives, when they would learn that their father was a traitor who had planned to abandon them and that their mother was a military officer whose real identity had been hidden from them for their entire lives. The professionals caring for them would help them understand that neither parent had stopped loving them, despite the deceptions and betrayals that had torn our family apart." At 6 o'clock that evening, I was medically cleared for discharge from Walter Reed and transported back to Millbrook by military escort. The return journey gave me time to prepare mentally for the confrontation with David that would begin the final phase of our operation. By the time I arrived home, David would have already learned about my military evacuation and my real identity, but he wouldn't yet understand the full extent of what I knew about his treasonous activities. The scene in our neighborhood when I returned was dramatically different from the quiet suburban street I had left that afternoon. News vans from local television stations were parked along Maple Street, and reporters were interviewing neighbors about the military helicopter evacuation they had witnessed. The story of the suburban housewife who had been revealed as a military officer was apparently newsworthy enough to attract significant media attention. Jennifer Walsh was waiting on my front porch when the military escort delivered me home, her face showing a mixture of concern and confusion about the dramatic revelations of the day. "Sarah, or should I call you Colonel Chen?" she asked uncertainly. "I've been so worried about you, but I also feel like I don't know who you really are." "You can call me Sarah," I replied, understanding her confusion and appreciating her concern. Despite the awkwardness of the situation, I'm the same person I've always been, just with a more complicated background than I was able to share before. The conversation with Jennifer was brief but important, establishing that my relationships with my neighbors could survive the revelation of my real identity. Her continued friendship and support would be valuable for Emma and Sophie as they adjusted to the dramatic changes in their lives and their understanding of their family. David's car pulled into our driveway at exactly 7:30, and I could see the shock and confusion on his face as he surveyed the news vans, the lingering evidence of the military operation, and the neighbors who were still gathered outside, discussing the day's events. His confident demeanor had been replaced by obvious anxiety and uncertainty about what he was about to face inside our house. "Sarah," David said as he entered the house, his voice strained and uncertain. "What the hell happened today? The neighbors are saying that military helicopters landed in our backyard and that you're some kind of colonel. That's impossible, right?" His assumption that my military background must be some kind of mistake or misunderstanding revealed how completely he had underestimated me throughout our marriage. Even now, faced with overwhelming evidence of my real identity, David couldn't accept that his suburban housewife had been living a more sophisticated cover identity than his own. "It's not impossible, David," I replied calmly. "It's the truth. My real name is Dr. Sarah Chen, and I hold the rank of Lieutenant Colonel in the United States Army Medical Corps. I've been serving my country while maintaining a civilian cover identity for the past 12 years. David stared at me with complete Incomprehension, his mind apparently unable to process the implications of what I was telling him. The woman he had been betraying and poisoning was not only a military officer but someone whose rank and medical training made her far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. "That's impossible," he repeated weakly. "You're a former nurse who left her career to raise our children. You don't know anything about military operations or classified information." The irony of David's statement was perfect. He had been selling information about my military background to foreign intelligence services while believing that I was an ordinary civilian. His handlers had known more about my real identity than he had, which explained why they had been so interested in recruiting him and why they had paid him so much money for information about our family. "David, I need to ask you about some things that have been troubling me," I said, beginning the confrontation that would force him to reveal his treasonous activities. "I've been noticing some changes in your behavior lately, and I think we need to have an honest conversation about what's been happening in our marriage." "What kind of changes?" he asked defensively, clearly hoping that he could still maintain his deceptions despite the revelation of my military background. "Your increased travel, your secretiveness about phone calls, your obsession with our expenses," I replied, listing the behavioral changes that had first alerted me to his betrayal. "Most importantly, your willingness to abandon me at urgent care during a blizzard for what you claimed was a business call." David's face went pale as he realized that I had been paying attention to his activities and that his cover story about Peterson Industries might not be sufficient to explain his recent behavior. He looked around our living room as if searching for an escape route or a way to avoid the conversation that was about to expose his crimes. "Sarah, you're still recovering from your medical crisis," he said, attempting to deflect the confrontation. "Maybe we should discuss this when you're feeling better." "I'm feeling fine, David," I replied firmly. "In fact, I'm feeling clearer than I have in months." The medical team at Walter Reed was very thorough in their examination, and they discovered some interesting things about my condition. "What kind of things?" David asked, and I could hear the nervousness in his voice as he began to suspect that his poisoning activities might have been discovered. "They found traces of a slow-acting cardiotoxin in my bloodstream," I said, watching his face carefully for his reaction. "Someone has been poisoning me over the past several weeks, causing the cardiac symptoms that brought me to urgent care. The military medical team believes it was administered deliberately by someone with access to my food and beverages." David's face went completely white, and I could see his hands trembling as he realized that his attempt to poison me had been discovered by military medical professionals. The sophisticated resources available to military medicine had easily detected and analyzed the toxin he had been using, providing clear evidence of his attempt to harm me. "That's ridiculous," David said weakly. "Who would want to poison you?" "Maybe it was some kind of contamination from food or environmental exposure." "The medical analysis was very specific, David," I continued relentlessly. "The toxin was administered in small doses over several weeks, mixed with substances that would mask its taste and appearance. It's not something that occurs naturally or accidentally. Someone with intimate access to my daily routine has been deliberately trying to harm my health." David looked around the room desperately, clearly searching for any explanation that would deflect suspicion away from himself. His nervous behavior was confirming his guilt more effectively than any confession could have. "This is crazy, Sarah," he said, his voice cracking with stress. "Why would anyone want to hurt you? You're just a suburban housewife who volunteers at the girls' school and organizes neighborhood events." "Actually, David, I'm a combat-trained trauma surgeon who has served 3 tours in Afghanistan and Iraq," I replied, allowing him to hear the steel in my voice for the first time. "I'm someone who knows how to recognize threats, investigate suspicious activities, and neutralize enemies who pose dangers to me or my family." The revelation of my combat experience seemed to terrify David more than my rank or my medical training. The idea that he had been living with and betraying a woman who had survived combat operations and had extensive training in dealing with hostile threats apparently hadn't occurred to him during his months of espionage activities. "David," I continued, "I know about Natasha Volkov. I know about the money you've been receiving from foreign intelligence services. I know about the information you've been selling about American military personnel and their families. Most importantly, I know about your plan to disappear with her and abandon Emma and Sophie without any explanation or concern for their well-being." The comprehensive nature of my knowledge seemed to paralyze David completely. He stared at me with the expression of someone whose entire world had just collapsed around him. The comfortable deceptions he had been living for 18 months were being systematically destroyed, and he was finally beginning to understand the magnitude of his situation. "How do you know about Natasha?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "Because I'm not the helpless suburban wife you thought you were betraying," I replied. I have access to investigative resources that can uncover any secret and track any activity. Your treasonous behavior has been under surveillance for weeks, and every communication you've had with your handlers has been monitored and recorded. David collapsed into his favorite armchair, apparently overwhelmed by the realization that his espionage activities had been discovered and that his wife was far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. The confident pharmaceutical sales representative, who had been selling state secrets, was being replaced by a frightened man who was beginning to understand the consequences of his actions. "What happens now?" he asked, seeming to realize that his arrest was inevitable and that his comfortable life was over. "Now you're going to call Natasha and tell her that you need to meet tonight to discuss the implications of my military background." Being revealed, I instructed. "You're going to follow the plan she gives you, and you're going to meet her exactly where and when she specifies." David stared at me with growing horror as he realized that I wasn't just confronting him about his betrayal but actively participating in a plan to capture him and his handlers. The woman he had underestimated for 12 years was now orchestrating his downfall with the same precision she had once applied to combat medicine. "You want me to help you arrest Natasha?" he asked incredulously. "I want you to follow the instructions your handlers give you, just as you've been doing for the past 18 months, I replied. "The only difference is that this time, when you meet with them, you'll be surrounded by FBI and military intelligence agents who will arrest all of you for espionage, treason, and conspiracy against the United States." The phone call David made to Natasha was recorded and monitored, providing final confirmation of their intelligence activities and their plans to escape together. Natasha instructed him to meet her at the Hartford warehouse at 10 o'clock that evening, where they would finalize their departure and transfer the remaining classified materials to their contacts. After David finished the call, he looked at me with an expression that combined fear, regret, and a desperate hope that somehow the situation could still be resolved without destroying his life completely. "Sarah, I know what I did was wrong. But I never meant for it to hurt you or the girls. Natasha convinced me that you didn't really love me and that our marriage was just part of your cover identity." The psychological manipulation he described was sophisticated and cruel, but it didn't excuse the choices he had made or the crimes he had committed against our family and our country. David had chosen money and excitement over loyalty to his wife and children, and now he would face the consequences of those choices. "David, you sold information that could have gotten me killed," I said, my voice steady and cold. "You provided foreign agents with details about our daughters that could be used to kidnap them or harm them. You poisoned me while pretending to love me, and you planned to abandon Emma and Sophie without any explanation or concern for their emotional well-being. Those aren't mistakes caused by manipulation, they're deliberate choices that reveal who you really are." As the time approached for David's final meeting with Natasha, I felt a sense of completion and justice that had been building since I first learned about his betrayal. The man who had abandoned me at urgent care during a blizzard was about to discover that his suburban housewife wife commanded resources that could destroy his life and his freedom. At 9:30, David left for his meeting with Natasha, unaware that FBI and military intelligence teams were already in position around the Hartford warehouse. His arrest would be swift and comprehensive, capturing him in the act of coordinating espionage activities with his foreign handlers. I watched from our living room window as David drove away for the last time as a free man. Within hours, he would be in federal custody facing charges that could result in life imprisonment. The comfortable suburban life he had built while betraying his family and his country was ending forever. At 11:15, Rebecca Torres called to confirm that the arrests had been successful. David Mitchell and Natasha Volkov are in federal custody, along with 3 other members of their intelligence network, she reported. They were captured with extensive documentation of their espionage activities and their plans to escape with classified information. The operation had been completely successful, resulting in the arrest of an entire spy network that had been targeting American military families for over 2 years. The information David had sold would no longer threaten other deep cover assets, and the message sent by his public arrest would deter other potential traitors from targeting military personnel. The aftermath of David's arrest was swift and comprehensive. News of the spy network's capture dominated local and national media, with particular attention focused on the suburban pharmaceutical sales representative who had been selling military secrets while his wife served her country under deep cover. The story captured public attention because it highlighted the sacrifices made by military families and the devastating consequences of betrayal from within. Emma and Sophie were brought home the following day, after receiving counseling to help them understand that their father's crimes were not their fault and that their mother's love for them had never been compromised by her cover identity. The transition was difficult for them, but they showed remarkable resilience in adapting to the truth about their family and their mother's real background. Over the following weeks, our neighborhood gradually adjusted to the revelation that Sarah Mitchell had been Dr. Sarah Chen all along. Most of our neighbors were supportive and understanding, appreciating the sacrifices I had made in service to my country. The girls' friends and teachers were also accepting, and Emma and Sophie found that their mother's military background was something they could be proud of rather than embarrassed about. 6 months later, David was sentenced to 35 years in federal prison for espionage, treason, and conspiracy against the United States. Natasha Volkov received a similar sentence, and their intelligence network was completely dismantled. The judge specifically noted the aggravating circumstances of David's betrayal of his family and his attempt to poison his wife, ensuring that he would serve the maximum possible sentence. As I stood in the courtroom listening to David's sentencing, I reflected on the journey that had begun with his abandonment of me at urgent care during a snowstorm. That act of casual cruelty had revealed his true character and had ultimately led to the discovery of his treasonous activities. The man who had thought he could manipulate and betray a suburban housewife had instead destroyed his own life by underestimating the woman he had been sleeping next to for 12 years. Today, I continue to serve my country as Dr. Sarah Chen, now openly and proudly rather than undercover. Emma and Sophie are thriving as the daughters of a military officer, and they understand that their mother's service represents values of loyalty, courage, and sacrifice that their father had abandoned for money and excitement. The house on Maple Street is still our home, but it's no longer a place where secrets and lies define our family relationships. We live openly and honestly, secure in the knowledge that we have faced the worst possible betrayal and emerged stronger and more united than ever before. David learned too late that the woman he left at urgent care during a snowstorm was someone whose phone calls could summon military helicopters and whose determination could destroy the lives of those who threatened her family. His face when those helicopters landed was the beginning of his understanding that he had chosen the wrong enemy, and his life in federal prison is the consequence of that fatal miscalculation. 3 years have passed since that December evening when David abandoned me at urgent care, and the transformation in our lives has been more profound than I ever could have imagined. This morning, as I stand in the kitchen of our home on Maple Street preparing breakfast for Emma and Sophie, I can hardly recognize the woman I used to be. The carefully constructed suburban housewife who lived in fear of revealing her true self has been replaced by someone who embraces both her military service and her role as a mother without apology or pretense. Emma, now 18 and preparing for her freshman year at West Point, moves through the kitchen with the confidence and purpose that comes from understanding exactly who she is and where she comes from. Her decision to follow in my footsteps by pursuing a military career filled me with pride and some concern, but I know that she possesses the strength and intelligence to excel in any path she chooses. The revelation of my military background, initially traumatic for her, had ultimately become a source of inspiration and direction. Sophie, now 17 and captain of her high school debate team, has channeled her analytical mind toward understanding international relations and national security policy. She spends her free time researching intelligence operations and has declared her intention to pursue a career in diplomatic security. The betrayal she experienced when learning about her father's crimes has motivated her to dedicate her life to protecting others from similar threats. Both girls have grown into remarkable young women who understand that strength comes not from hiding who you are but from embracing your authentic self regardless of the challenges that authenticity might bring. They have learned that love is demonstrated through loyalty and sacrifice, not through comfortable lies and manufactured security. The neighborhood has also adapted to our transformed identity in ways that continue to surprise me. Jennifer Walsh remains one of my closest friends, and our relationship has actually deepened since the revelation of my military background. She frequently tells me that knowing the truth about my service has helped her understand qualities she had always admired in me but couldn't quite identify. Our coffee conversations now include discussions about my deployments and my ongoing work with military medical research, topics that were forbidden during my years of maintaining cover. Tom Walsh has become something of an unofficial neighborhood historian of our dramatic story, often entertaining visitors with detailed accounts of the day military helicopters landed in our backyard. He takes particular pride in describing how he always suspected there was more to Sarah Mitchell than met the eye, though I suspect his intuition has been enhanced considerably by hindsight. The media attention that followed David's arrest and trial was intense but ultimately beneficial for our family and for the Deep Cover program. The story of the suburban housewife who turned out to be a combat surgeon resonated with people across the country, generating discussions about the sacrifices made by military families and the importance of protecting those who serve their country in unconventional ways. The publicity also led to positive changes in how Deep Cover assets are supported and protected. New protocols were implemented to provide better psychological support for family members, improved security screening for potential threats, and enhanced resources for assets whose covers are compromised. David's betrayal, while devastating for our family, has made other military families safer and more secure. My work has evolved significantly since returning to my authentic identity. I now serve as Director of Combat Medical Training at Walter Reed Medical Center, a position that allows me to prepare the next generation of military medical personnel for the challenges they will face in hostile environments. The skills I developed during my deployments in Afghanistan and Iraq are now being passed on to young doctors and medics who will carry forward the mission of saving lives in the most dangerous places on Earth. The irony is not lost on me that David's attempt to destroy my career and my life ultimately led to opportunities and recognition that would never have been available while I was living undercover. The woman he tried to poison and abandon has achieved professional success and personal fulfillment beyond anything I had imagined during my years of hiding my true accomplishments. Rebecca Torres continues to serve as my contact with the Deep Cover program, though our relationship has evolved from handler and asset to colleagues and friends. She frequently visits our home for dinner, and Emma and Sophie consider her an honorary aunt who brings fascinating stories about intelligence operations and international security challenges. Rebecca often remarks that our family's openness about my military background has made my ongoing service more effective rather than compromising it. The house on Maple Street has become something of a landmark in our community, not because of the dramatic events that took place here but because of what it represents about the complexity and courage of American military families. Neighbors frequently bring visitors to see where the famous helicopter landing occurred, and our home has become a symbol of the sacrifices and dedication that exist in ordinary communities across the country. The legal proceedings surrounding David's case continued long after his initial sentencing, as federal investigators worked to understand the full scope of the intelligence network he had been part of. The information he provided led to additional arrests and the disruption of spy operations that had been targeting military families for over a decade. His cooperation with investigators, motivated more by self-preservation than remorse, helped protect countless other deep cover assets and their families. Natasha Volkov, despite serving her sentence in federal prison, continues to be a subject of interest for intelligence agencies trying to understand Russian recruitment and operational methods. Her psychological manipulation of David has become a case study in how foreign agents exploit personal vulnerabilities to turn American citizens against their own country. The techniques she used are now taught in counterintelligence training programs to help identify and prevent similar recruitment attempts. David himself has become a cautionary tale within both military and civilian communities about the devastating consequences of betraying one's family and country for personal gain. His letters to Emma and Sophie, which they have chosen not to read, sit unopened in a file at our attorney's office. The girls have made it clear that they are not interested in communication from someone who chose to endanger their lives and abandon their family for money and excitement. The financial aftermath of David's crimes was complex but ultimately manageable. The money he had received from foreign intelligence services was seized by federal authorities and distributed among the families of deep cover assets whose security had been compromised by his betrayal. Our family's financial stability was maintained through my military benefits and the support provided to families of compromised assets. More importantly, the emotional and psychological recovery from David's betrayal has been successful beyond what any of us had dared to hope. Emma and Sophie have both received counseling to help them process the trauma of learning that their father was a traitor, but they have emerged from that experience stronger and more resilient. They understand that David's choices were his own, and do not reflect on their worth or their mother's love for them. The girls have also developed a sophisticated understanding of the complexities of military service and the sacrifices required to protect national security. They frequently speak at school events about their family's experience, helping other students understand that patriotism and service take many forms and that heroes can be found in the most ordinary seeming places. My relationship with my daughters has deepened significantly since the revelation of my true identity. They are proud of my military service and my combat experience, and they appreciate the strength and courage that those experiences developed in me. The mother they thought they knew has been revealed as someone even more impressive and inspiring than they had imagined. The success of our family's adaptation to living authentically has made me an advocate for reducing the use of long-term cover identities whenever possible. While I understand the operational necessity of such programs, I have seen firsthand the psychological cost of living as someone you're not and the benefits that come from being able to embrace your real accomplishments and experiences. Emma's graduation from high school last month was a particularly meaningful milestone for our family. As I watched her deliver the valedictorian speech about courage, integrity, and service, I was struck by how much she had grown since that traumatic evening when her world was turned upside down by her father's arrest. The young woman on that stage was confident, articulate, and committed to making a positive difference in the world. Sophie's achievements in debate and her leadership roles at school have been equally impressive. Her ability to analyze complex issues and present persuasive arguments reflects both natural talent and the resilience she developed during our family's crisis. Teachers frequently comment on her maturity and her thoughtful approach to challenging topics. Both girls have developed close relationships with other military children, finding community and understanding among peers who share similar experiences of sacrifice and service. They participate in programs for military families and often volunteer at events supporting veterans and active duty personnel. The annual memorial service for military medical personnel has become an important tradition for our family. This year, Emma delivered a speech about the sacrifices made by military families, including those who serve undercover to protect national security. Her words brought tears to the eyes of many attendees, including senior military officers who were moved by her understanding of the complexities and costs of military service. As I reflect on the 3 years that have passed since David's betrayal was revealed, I am struck by how much stronger our family has become through surviving that crisis. The woman who was abandoned at urgent care during a snowstorm discovered reserves of strength and determination she didn't know she possessed. The daughters who learned their father was a traitor have grown into remarkable young women who understand the difference between loyalty and betrayal. The neighborhood that witnessed military helicopters landing in a suburban backyard has gained a deeper appreciation for the military families who live among them and the sacrifices they make to protect American freedom and security. The community that thought they knew Sarah Mitchell has embraced Dr. Sarah Chen with warmth and respect. Most importantly, our family has learned that authenticity is worth any temporary discomfort or disruption it might cause. Living as our true selves, with all the complexities and challenges that entails, has brought us closer together and made us more effective in our service to others. David's attempt to destroy our family ultimately revealed its true strength. His betrayal, intended to tear us apart, instead eliminated the lies and pretenses that had been limiting our potential. The man who thought he could manipulate and abandon us discovered that he had underestimated not just me but the entire family he was betraying. The helicopter landing that shocked our neighborhood 3 years ago has become a symbol of the resources and determination that protect American military families. David's face when those helicopters appeared was the beginning of his understanding that he had chosen the wrong enemy and underestimated the woman he thought he could betray without consequences. Today, as I prepare for another day of training, the next generation of combat medics, I am grateful for the journey that brought me to this point. The painful discovery of David's betrayal led to a life of greater purpose, deeper relationships, and authentic service to my country. The woman who was abandoned during a medical crisis has become someone who saves lives and protects others from similar betrayals. Emma and Sophie are thriving as they pursue their own paths of service and leadership. They carry forward the lessons learned from our family's experience, understanding that strength comes from facing truth rather than avoiding it, and that loyalty is demonstrated through action rather than comfortable words. The house on Maple Street remains our home, but it is no longer a place where secrets define our relationships or limit our potential. We live openly and proudly as a military family that has faced the worst possible betrayal and emerged stronger, more united, and more committed to serving others than ever before. David learned too late that the suburban housewife he left at urgent care commanded resources that could summon military helicopters and destroy the lives of those who threatened her family. His shocked expression when those helicopters landed was the first glimpse of the consequences that would define the rest of his life. The woman he underestimated has continued to serve her country with distinction, while he serves his sentence in federal prison, a cautionary tale about the cost of betraying those who dedicate their lives to protecting others. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.